Ladies and gentlemen, the naval landscape of the Black Sea has undergone a profound transformation following a large-scale engagement on the night of March 1 and into the early hours of March 2, 2026. In what appears to be one of the most complex coordinated strikes of the conflict to date, a massive wave of approximately 200 aerial and maritime drones targeted the Novorossiysk naval base and its surrounding infrastructure. This port, which had become the primary operating hub for the Russian Black Sea Fleet after its withdrawal from Sevastopol, was subjected to a sustained bombardment that has challenged the established notions of safe harbor in the region. The subsurface reality is that the reach of Ukrainian precision assets has now effectively matched the geographical retreat of the Russian fleet, rendering the 300-kilometer distance from previous front lines statistically irrelevant. The tactical significance of this strike lies in the saturation effect used to overwhelm local defenses. While the Russian Ministry of Defense reported the successful interception of over 170 drones across the Krasnodar region and the Black Sea, independent reports and satellite imagery have confirmed that multiple projectiles reached high-value targets. The subsurface reality is that even a high interception rate cannot compensate for the sheer volume of a 200-unit swarm. This engagement resulted in confirmed damage to 5 Russian naval vessels, including the Project 266M minesweeper Valentin Pikul and 2 Project 1124M anti-submarine corvettes, the Yeysk and the Kasimov. These ships, designed for mine clearance and littoral defense, represent the protective screen of the fleet. Their degradation leaves larger assets significantly more vulnerable to future maritime drone incursions. The broader strategic consequence of the March 2nd operation is the interdiction of energy logistics. Beyond the naval targets, the Sheskharis oil terminal, a critical node for Russian crude exports, sustained major damage, with 6 out of 7 oil loading berths reportedly hit. The subsurface reality is that this strike has forced a temporary reduction in crude oil intake of approximately 250,000 barrels per day, creating a ripple effect in regional energy markets. Furthermore, the confirmed destruction of key radar components from S-400 and S-300 air defense systems at the base suggests a systematic effort to blind the port's defensive umbrella. As of mid-March 2026, the Russian Naval Command faces a difficult calculus. They must either invest heavily in even more advanced point defense systems or consider a further withdrawal even deeper into the eastern reaches of the Black Sea. The problem for both sides in this intensifying drone war is the sustainability of attrition for Ukraine. The successful deployment of a 200 drone swarm proves a maturing domestic production capability and a high level of operational coordination. For Russia, the challenge is maintaining the functionality of a fleet that is increasingly port-bound and unable to project power without facing catastrophic risk. The chain of consequences leads to a static naval conflict where ships are no longer tools of maneuver but stationary targets. As we move into the spring of 2026, the battle for the Black Sea has moved beyond the control of traditional hulls and into the realm of autonomous saturation, where the side that can produce and launch the most drones will dictate the terms of maritime security. Ladies and gentlemen, we now conduct a systematic review of the specific naval assets impacted during the engagement on the night of March 1 into March 2, 2026. The subsurface reality of this drone strike is that it targeted the auxiliary backbone of the Black Sea Fleet, the vessels responsible for protecting the larger, more expensive frigates. Leading the list of damaged hulls is the Valentin Pikul, a Project 266M minesweeper. While officially classified for mine clearance, the Pikul functions as a critical anti-submarine and electronic warfare platform equipped with 20 Igla surface-to-air missiles and twin 30mm cannons. Its reported significant structural damage represents a gap in the fleet's ability to detect and intercept the low-profile maritime drones that have increasingly characterized the conflict in the year 2026. The danger for the Russian Naval Command is the symmetric loss of the Project 1124M Albatross corvettes, the Yeysk and the Kasimov. These small anti-submarine ships were specifically moored at Novorossiysk to provide a defensive screen against underwater incursions. The subsurface reality is that these vessels are multi-role platforms capable of maritime patrols, reconnaissance, and laying underwater mines. By striking both ships simultaneously, the operation has effectively thinned the defensive perimeter of the port. While casualty figures remain low with reports of 3 fatalities and 14 wounded, the loss of the hulls themselves forces the remaining fleet into a state of operational stasis where sailors are effectively confined to port without the means to conduct active sorties. The strategic significance of the strike also extends to the Admiral Essen, one of the fleet's modern frigates and a primary platform for launching caliber cruise missiles. Independent analysis and reports from the Kyiv Post on March 5, 2026 indicate that the Essen sustained a direct hit to its passive countermeasure launchers and its electronic warfare systems. The subsurface reality is that the damage to the frigate's missile guidance and anti-aircraft systems has rendered it a sidelined asset. This represents a tangible reduction in Russia's ability to conduct long-range precision strikes from the Black Sea, as the Essen was a central component of the missile barrages targeting the Ukrainian power grid throughout early 2026. The final confirmed naval target was a Molniya-class missile boat, a Project 1241 vessel. Drones reportedly scored direct hits on the stern section, impacting the engine room and diesel generators. The subsurface reality is that these Soviet-era vessels, while aging, remain potent missile platforms that are increasingly difficult for Russia to replace due to their discontinued production. The chain of consequences for the Novorossiysk base is an accelerated attrition rate. With 5 ships damaged in a single nocturnal operation, the Black Sea Fleet's operational capacity has been reduced by approximately 15% in a matter of hours. As of March 10, 2026, the Naval Command is faced with a fleet that is physically present but tactically paralyzed, unable to defend even its most secure harbor against the persistent evolution of drone technology. Ladies and gentlemen, we now turn our attention to the critical infrastructure targets that were engaged alongside the naval assets during the operations of March 1 and March 2, 2026. Beyond the damage to the Black Sea Fleet's protective screen, a significant portion of the 200 drone swarm was directed toward the Sheskharis oil terminal. The subsurface reality is that this facility is a primary gateway for Russian energy exports, and the confirmed ignition of a major fire at the complex represents a direct strike against the economic engine of the state. According to reports from the Ukrainian General Staff on March 2, the engagement resulted in the confirmed destruction of 6 out of 7 oil-loading berths, effectively paralyzing the terminal's ability to load tankers for the immediate future. The danger for the regional energy market lies in the supply chain disruption. The Sheskharis terminal manages a significant volume of crude oil that is transported from inland fields to global markets via the Black Sea. The subsurface reality of March 10, 2026 is that the temporary loss of these loading berths has created a logistical bottleneck that could take weeks to resolve. With only 1 functional berth remaining, Russia's export capacity through Novorossiysk has been reduced by approximately 85%. This is the fiscal hemorrhage of the war. While the ships are expensive, the oil is the revenue that pays for the ships. By striking the berths, the operation has targeted the very liquidity of the Russian military-industrial complex. The strategic significance of this infrastructure strike also involves the integrated defense shield. Reports have confirmed that the drone swarm successfully targeted and destroyed the guidance radar for an S-400 and an S-300 air defense battery, as well as a Pantsir S-2 point defense system located at the terminal. The subsurface reality is that these systems were the guardians of the oil. Their destruction creates an aerial corridor that makes future strikes against the Sheskharis terminal significantly easier to execute. In the year 2026, we are witnessing a systemic deconstruction of Russia's southern defenses, where the attacker first blinds the radar and then evaporates the economic assets. The chain of consequences leads to an acute operational strain. Russia must now divert high-end air defense systems from the front lines in Ukraine to protect its remaining energy infrastructure in Novorossiysk. The subsurface reality is that there is a finite number of S-400 systems available, and every battery moved to the coast is one less battery protecting the troops on the ground. As of March 10, 2026, the Novorossiysk safe harbor has become a resource sink that is draining both the naval and the air defense reserves of the state. The impact of the March 2nd strike is not just measured in sunken hulls, but in the deteriorating equilibrium of Russia's ability to protect its most valuable industrial and military assets simultaneously. Ladies and gentlemen, we now analyze the tactical evolution that has redefined the naval engagement parameters of the Black Sea. The events of March 1st and 2nd, 2026 represent a definitive shift from the sporadic missile strikes of the previous years to a doctrine of mass saturation. The subsurface reality is that the deployment of a 200-unit drone swarm marks the largest coordinated autonomous strike in maritime history. This is not merely a change in scale, it is a systemic overload of the Russian Aegis-style air defense network. By launching an overwhelming volume of cheap attritional assets, the operation forced the Novorossiysk defensive umbrella to exhaust its kinetic interceptors, creating gaps in the shield that allowed the final lethal wave of drones to reach the naval piers and the Sheskharis oil berths. The danger for the Russian Naval Command is the collapse of geographic depth. In 2023, the relocation of the Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk was intended to place high-value assets outside the range of Ukrainian Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. The subsurface reality of March 10, 2026 is that geography is no longer a defensive barrier. Ukraine has successfully operationalized Sea Baby and Magura maritime drones with extended ranges exceeding 800 kilometers, alongside long-range airborne drones that can loiter for hours before striking. This persistent presence means that a target once considered rear echelon is now a frontline asset, subjected to constant surveillance and potential destruction. The strategic significance of this drone saturation is the cost asymmetry trap. Every S-400 missile or Pantsir interceptor fired by the Russian military costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. The subsurface reality is that the drones utilized in the 200-unit swarm are produced at a fraction of that cost. In the year 2026, the Russian military is essentially trading gold for lead. The more drones Ukraine launches, the faster Russia depletes its high-end munitions and radar components. This is the industrial attrition of modern war. It is not about who has the biggest ship, but who can sustain the highest rate of production for autonomous, disposable strike systems. The chain of consequences for the Novorossiysk base is an irreversible defensive decay. With the confirmed destruction of guidance radars for the S-300 and S-400 batteries on March 2nd, the port's protective dome has been structurally weakened. The subsurface reality is that replacing these specialized radar units is a time-consuming process hindered by international sanctions on high-end electronics. As of March 10, 2026, the Black Sea Fleet is faced with an existential choice: remain in Novorossiysk and risk total evaporation in the next swarm, or retreat even further east toward Abkhazia, effectively removing themselves from any meaningful participation in the conflict. The Horde of 200 has proven that in the era of autonomous warfare, there are no safe harbors, only temporary delays. Ladies and gentlemen, we now analyze the internal tremors within the Russian military hierarchy following the systemic failure of the Novorossiysk defensive umbrella. The operations of March 1 and March 2, 2026 have not only resulted in the loss of 5 hulls and critical energy infrastructure, but have also triggered a command crisis within the Kremlin. The subsurface reality is that the Black Sea Fleet's current commander, Admiral Sergei Pinchuk, is operating under a cloud of intense political scrutiny. Reports circulating in mid-March suggest that the Russian Naval Command is evaluating the potential for a leadership purge to address the perceived inability of the fleet to protect its most high-value assets, even in a designated safe harbor. The danger for the Russian naval structure lies in the revolving door of command. Since the beginning of the conflict, multiple admirals have been removed or reassigned following significant maritime losses. The subsurface reality is that changing the commander does not address the technological deficit facing the fleet. Admiral Pinchuk inherited a force that was already functionally constrained by the loss of the Moskva and the subsequent withdrawal from Sevastopol. In the year 2026, the Russian Navy is finding that no amount of traditional naval doctrine can counter a 200-unit drone swarm. The command crisis is in reality a doctrinal crisis. The fleet is being led by officers trained for blue water surface engagements, while the war is being fought with low-cost autonomous saturation. The strategic significance of this leadership instability is the erosion of institutional memory. Every time a commander is replaced in the wake of a disaster, the learning curve for the successor begins anew under even higher pressure. The subsurface reality of March 10, 2026 is that the Russian military is seeking scapegoats rather than solutions. While Admiral Pinchuk may be held responsible for the March 2nd failure, the true cause lies in the systemic obsolescence of the Novorossiysk air defense configuration against a persistent and evolving drone threat. This blame culture within the Kremlin prevents the necessary shift toward more agile, drone-centric naval defenses, leaving the remaining fleet in a state of defensive paralysis. The chain of consequences leads to an acute morale collapse among the rank-and-file sailors when 5 ships are damaged in a single night despite being 300 kilometers from the main theater of operations. The perception of safety evaporates. The subsurface reality is that sailors are now effectively stationary targets waiting for the next swarm, while their leadership is preoccupied with political survival in Moscow. As of March 10, 2026, the Black Sea Fleet is a leaderless entity in all but name, struggling to adapt to a reality where the invisible horde of drones has rendered traditional naval authority irrelevant. The Pinchuk crisis is merely a symptom of a much larger decay. The end of the era where a centralized command can effectively manage a decentralized, autonomous war. Ladies and gentlemen, we now analyze the strategic expansion of the maritime conflict as it moves from the piers of Novorossiysk to the structural foundations of the Kerch Bridge. While the operations of March 1 and March 2, 2026 focused on the Black Sea Fleet's protective screen, their subsurface reality is a preparatory phase for the interdiction of Russia's primary logistical artery to Crimea. In the months leading up to this escalation, we have observed a critical evolution in autonomous naval technology, the emergence of the subsea baby. This is an unmanned underwater vehicle designed to navigate the sonar-dense environments of the Kerch Strait while remaining entirely invisible to the surface-based electronic warfare systems that Russia has spent billions to deploy. The danger for the Russian Ministry of Defense is the multi-domain integration of the attack. On January 28, 2026, a series of explosions rocked the Crimean Peninsula, resulting in the temporary closure of the Kerch Bridge and hits on the Saki and Kacha airfields. The subsurface reality is that these aerial strikes are being used to mask the movement of underwater assets. By forcing Russian air defenses into high-intensity engagement with airborne drone swarms, the attacker creates an acoustic and radar fog, allowing the subsea baby to maneuver toward the bridge's reinforced concrete pile bundles undetected. This underwater shadow represents a threat that the traditional Aegis-style defenses of the Black Sea Fleet are not designed to intercept. The strategic significance of this development is the vulnerability of the pillar. While the Kerch Bridge has been reinforced with boom barriers, metal screens, and parallel lines of piles to stop surface drones, the subsurface reality of March 10, 2026 is that these defenses do not extend to the deep water fairway beneath the main arch. The Marichka and Subsea Baby platforms are capable of delivering payloads exceeding 850 kilograms of high explosives directly to the bridge's underwater supports. A single successful detonation against these critical structural members would result in a logistical decapitation of the Crimean Peninsula, cutting off the rail and road links that supply the southern grouping of Russian forces. The chain of consequences leads to an acute siege mentality for the occupation authorities. As the Black Sea Fleet retreats further toward Novorossiysk to escape the horde of 200, the Kerch Bridge is left increasingly isolated, defended only by stationary barges and decoy targets. The subsurface reality is that the fleet's protective umbrella has been retracted, leaving the imperial symbol of the bridge exposed to a dual threat of Taurus-class bunker-busting missiles from the air and autonomous torpedoes from below. As of March 10, 2026, the Sea Baby and its undersea variants have proven that in modern naval warfare, the most fortified structure is only as strong as its weakest underwater point. The battle for the bridge has moved from the surface to the shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, we now shift our focus from the naval theater to the high-intensity logistical war unfolding across the Kupiansk-Kramatorsk sector. In the first 10 days of March 2026, the Eastern Front has become a proving ground for a new doctrine of interdiction at the source. The subsurface reality is that while Russian forces have concentrated a massive grouping of troops for an anticipated spring offensive toward the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk urban belt, their operational mobility is being systematically degraded by a series of deep rear strikes. On the night of March 5, 2026, Ukrainian long-range assets targeted a primary fuel and ammunition unloading site in occupied Luhansk, a critical logistics hub that serves as the lifeblood for offensive groups moving toward the Oskil River. The danger for the Russian Western grouping of forces lies in the fragility of the rail link. As of March 10, 2026, the Russian military remains heavily dependent on a centralized railway network to move the thousands of tons of materiel required for high-intensity armored assaults. The subsurface reality is that the drone saturation tactics we observed in Novorossiysk have been adapted for the Donbass theater. By utilizing thousands of low-cost FPV and Baba Yaga drones, the defense has created a zero-movement zone extending 30 kilometers behind the Russian front lines. Any truck, fuel tanker, or locomotive attempting to supply the Kupiansk sector is now subjected to near-constant surveillance and precision strikes, leading to what analysts term a starvation of the spearhead. The strategic significance of this logistical attrition is the disruption of the Russian winter-spring transition. Throughout February 2026, the Russian command launched 4 massive strike packages, each containing over 400 drones and missiles, attempting to collapse the Ukrainian energy grid. However, the subsurface reality in March is that the target set has shifted. Both sides are now engaged in a war of the warehouses. While Russia targets Ukrainian railway logistics and water infrastructure, Ukraine has utilized its primary special units to decapitate Russian command and observation points, such as the one struck near Krylyakivka on March 6. This is a battle for equilibrium, where the side that can maintain its flow of ammunition and fuel through the porous front lines will dictate the tempo of the coming months. The chain of consequences leads to a stagnation of maneuver. Despite reported Russian tactical gains of approximately 25 square miles in the final week of February, the subsurface reality of March 10, 2026 is a measurable slowdown in the rate of advance. The firestorm that was predicted to erupt near Slavyansk has been delayed by the systematic evaporation of the necessary fuel reserves. As of mid-March, the Kupiansk-Kramatorsk sector is defined by constrained attrition, where both armies are forced to metabolize high casualty rates while struggling to secure their own rear. The logistics of desperation has turned the Eastern Front into a static, high-tech siege, proving that in 2026, no amount of manpower can overcome the total absence of a secure supply line. The subsurface reality is that while the Horde of 200 has functionally dismantled the Black Sea Fleet's presence in Novorossiysk, neither side possesses the traditional mass required for a decisive, war-ending breakthrough. We are witnessing a revolution in military affairs where the primary drivers of the operational tempo are no longer armored divisions or carrier groups, and in that way, but the industrial throughput of autonomous systems and artificial intelligence. The war has become a contest of software integration versus kinetic mass. The danger for the remainder of 2026 is the limbo of escalation. According to recent analytical reports, the conflict is trapped in a Nash equilibrium, a game theory scenario where neither player can gain an advantage by changing their strategy alone. The subsurface reality is that as the Mullah regime in Iran absorbs Western diplomatic bandwidth and energy prices fluctuate near $92, Russia is attempting to exploit this global distraction to press its advantage in the fortress belt of eastern Ukraine. However, the systematic destruction of the Sheskharis oil terminal and the radar networks of the S-400 on March 2nd has proven that the defense can now strike the economic heartland of the attacker with the same frequency that the attacker strikes the front lines. The strategic significance of the next 6 months is the northward shift of the naval conflict. As navigation opens along the Don-Volga river routes in April and May, the subsurface reality is that Russia may be forced to transfer its remaining operational assets out of the Black Sea death trap and toward the Baltic or northern regions. This would signal the total abandonment of maritime ambition in the south. Meanwhile, the emergence of fiber optic drones and AI-assisted targeting has rendered traditional electronic warfare obsolete, turning the battlefield into a transparent kill zone where no tank or ship can remain hidden for more than a few minutes. In the year 2026, the cost-exchange ratio has become the ultimate metric of victory. The final problem for the global community is the sustainability of the standoff. As combined casualties approach the 2 million mark by the spring of 2026, the pressure for a frozen peace is mounting in Western capitals. Yet, the subsurface reality remains that as long as the drone swarms continue to find their targets in Novorossiysk and Luhansk, the cycle of attrition will continue. The long war of 2026 is not a stalemate of exhaustion, but a high-speed evolution of warfare itself. Whether the world enters a period of bipolar stability or continuous chaos depends on which side can first master the mathematics of the swarm. The Black Sea hellstorm was not an ending, but the opening chapter of a new, autonomous era of human conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where our program comes to a pause. Please leave your thoughts in the comments so we can continue the discussion together. And if this is your first time watching, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the earliest notifications of our upcoming videos. Goodbye, and see you again soon.